The paradox of the empty hour: we are taught that discipline is a finite resource, a muscle that tires under heavy use. We assume that the more we do, the more likely we are to snap and give in to temptation. But if you observe your own behavior closely, you will notice a counterintuitive pattern. You do not usually ruin your diet in the middle of a high-stakes work crisis. You ruin it at 9 p.m. while sitting on the couch with nothing to do. You do not lose your focus when the project is difficult. You lose it during the 5-minute transition between tasks. Modern psychology is beginning to uncover a disturbing truth. Discipline does not just fail under pressure. It fails more consistently and more silently when there is no pressure at all. When your cognitive load, the amount of information and effort your working memory is processing, drops to zero, your executive function doesn't stay on standby. It disappears. Personal relevance, the danger of mental slack. Most of us spend our lives trying to reduce our load. We want fewer emails, shorter meetings, and more free time. We believe that if we could just clear our schedules, we would finally have the mental space to pursue our highest goals, to write the book, to start the exercise routine, or to learn the new skill. But mental slack is a psychological trap. In the absence of a demanding task, the brain enters a state of high vulnerability. This is the low cognitive load state. In this environment, the gap between who you are and who you want to be becomes a chasm. Think of your mind like a high-performance engine. It is designed to run under a specific amount of tension. When that tension is removed, the engine doesn't just sit quietly, it begins to vibrate, heat up, and eventually stall. This is why you feel more exhausted after a day of doing nothing than after a day of intense, focused work. It is also why, in those moments of nothingness, you find yourself making choices that actively sabotage your future. 1. The idle brain and the default mode network. To understand why discipline evaporates in the absence of work, we must look at the brain's resting state. When you are not focused on an external task, a specific set of brain regions takes over. This is known as the default mode network, M. The DMEM is responsible for internalized thinking. It is the network that powers daydreaming, ruminating on the past, and worrying about the future. While the DMEM is essential for creativity and processing social information, it has a dark side. It is highly self-referential and often negative. Research conducted at Harvard University by psychologists Matthew Killingsworth and Daniel Gilbert famously concluded that a wandering mind is an unhappy mind. They found that people are substantially less happy when their minds are wandering than when they are focused on a task, even if that task is mundane or unpleasant. The reason discipline fails here is simple. The DMM is the direct competitor of the central executive network. The CEN is what you use for discipline, logic, and goal-directed behavior. These two networks are anti-correlated. When one is on, the other is mostly off. When your cognitive load is low, the DMM surges. It fills your head with noise, cravings, and distractions to escape the discomfort of being alone with your thoughts. Because the CEN, the disciplined self, is offline, you have no filter to stop the first impulse that promises a distraction from that internal noise. 2. The Yerkes-Dodson law and the boredom zone. For decades, psychologists have used the Yerkes-Dodson law to explain human performance. It posits that performance increases with physiological or mental arousal, but only up to a point. When levels of arousal become too high, performance falls. We call this choking under pressure. However, we rarely discuss the left side of the bell curve, the under-arousal zone. When your cognitive load is too low, you are in a state of sensory and mental deprivation. In this state, your brain's prefrontal cortex, the seat of willpower, is not sufficiently stimulated to stay active. It begins to power down to conserve glucose. This creates a discipline vacuum. Without the tension of a deadline, a challenge, or a complex problem, your brain's priority shifts from achievement to stimulation. This explains why it is often easier to stay on a diet during a busy workday. Your arousal levels are in the optimal zone. Your prefrontal cortex is fired up and engaged. But on a slow Saturday morning, your arousal drops. Your brain perceives this drop as a threat and begins searching for the fastest way to spike your dopamine. This is why you find yourself staring into the refrigerator or scrolling through social media for hours. It is a desperate attempt by an underloaded brain to return to the optimal arousal zone. 3. The decision depletion paradox. A popular theory in psychology is ego depletion. The idea that willpower is a limited battery that runs out. While this theory is debated, a more accurate phenomenon in the context of low cognitive load is decision atrophy. When you are engaged in a high-load task, you are in decision mode. You are constantly filtering information and making choices. This creates a psychological momentum. However, when you enter a low-load environment, you stop making active choices and move into passive mode. In passive mode, you don't decide to watch 5 hours of television. You simply fail to decide not to. Under low cognitive load, the cost of starting a new, disciplined action feels monumental. This is known as activation energy. Because your brain is in a low-energy, passive state, the amount of mental effort required to transition from scrolling to working out is perceived as physically painful. Research in behavioral economics shows that humans are biologically hardwired for default bias. We tend to stick with whatever we are currently doing unless a significant force pushes us out of it. In a low-load environment, the default is always least effort. Without the momentum of a busy mind, you lack the force required to overcome your own inertia. 4. The scarcity of focus in modern environments. We live in an era where the low cognitive load state is being aggressively monetized. Tech companies understand that an understimulated brain is a vulnerable brain. When you have nothing to do, you are a prime target for the attention economy. Platforms like TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram are designed to be the perfect filler for low-load moments. They provide just enough stimulation to stop the dopamine from making you feel uncomfortable, but not enough load to trigger your executive network. They keep you in a cognitive limbo. This creates a dangerous feedback loop. The more time you spend in these low-load, high-stimulation environments, the more your brain loses its tonic alertness, the ability to maintain focus without external pressure. You may feel that you are relaxing, but you are actually training your brain to be incapable of discipline. By constantly filling every gap in your day with passive stimulation, you are ensuring that your prefrontal cortex never has to work. Over time, the discipline muscle doesn't just tire, it withers. This is why, after a long period of rest, many people find it almost impossible to return to a state of high-level productivity. Their brain has forgotten how to handle a load. 5. The strategy of artificial load. If the absence of a task is what causes the failure of discipline, then the solution is not more willpower, but the strategic application of artificial load. High performers often use micro-challenges to keep their executive functions online during transition periods. This might be as simple as practicing a language for 5 minutes between meetings or setting a strict timer for rest periods. The goal is to never let the cognitive load drop to zero. By maintaining a baseline level of mental effort, you keep the central executive network active. You stay in action mode. When you maintain this low-level tension, the transition to a major task is a small step rather than a giant leap. Furthermore, you must recognize that rest and low load are not the same thing. True rest, like deep meditation, a walk in nature, or sleep, actually restores your cognitive resources. Low-load activities, like passive scrolling or mindless eating, actually drain them. To protect your discipline, you must guard your quiet moments more fiercely than your busy ones. The unresolved mind. We often think of the undisciplined version of ourselves as a separate, weaker person who emerges when we are tired. But the reality is more unsettling. That version of you is always there, waiting in the silence. It emerges the moment you stop giving your brain something to do. The next time you find yourself with an hour of unexpected free time, pay attention to the subtle shift in your physiology. Feel the urge to escape the quiet, the pull toward the low-effort choice, and the slow fading of your long-term goals. The most dangerous moment for your future isn't the moment you are challenged. It is the moment you are comfortable.